afternoon, everybody. Tom Metalhead Weatherman here. Hopefully, everybody is doing well. So, here it is. This is the feature that's going to be causing a lot of cold weather and some early season snow for some of us over here. If you live over towards the Appalachian Mountains, it's this feature and another upper level low that we have over here that's going to be coming into play here. That's going to allow for this big cool down that we're going to have over towards the eastern half of the country. Towards the northwest as well, this bombed out cyclone is causing atmospheric river conditions over towards the northwest. Winds are pretty high right now over towards the region. Snow is coming down also towards the higher elevations here. So definitely some big time weather going on within particular areas. Also would be pretty remiss to mention the rainfall that we're getting over towards the southeast, which is honestly a welcome sight for a lot of us. I think a lot of us can remember that October we had essentially no rain in a lot of these areas. Whether you were Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, it was relatively dry. But good thing is we're getting a nice little healthy dose of rainfall. I wouldn't expect anything major from this. I wouldn't expect much in the way of flooding, although I never rule anything out. Still, if you have any plants that are going to be out towards this time of year, this rain will definitely be beneficial to you. That being said, though, as we take a look at the icon here, we're really going to be more or less focusing at the start of this time frame here, the impacts over towards the northwest, because I do think that that should be talked about. There are some really strong winds, and if any of you weather nerds are asking why that I'm looking at the 700 millibar height map, it's because if you go to 850 and 825, you don't get any readings from the weather models here. Now, this number isn't super accurate, obviously, for anyone that's in the valleys, of course, but I think you can get a pretty good idea just how strong the winds are from this bombed out cyclone. And of course, this is part of that 1-2 punch that comes into play that's going to cause this big cool down over towards the east here. It's going to help this feature move in here. This major league upper level low here is going to drop our temperature significantly and also bring the threat of some snow into the mix as well towards the northeast, the Great Lakes, and maybe the Ohio Valley as well. I'm not thinking the snowfall totals will be quite as impressive as what we saw maybe a few days earlier, but nonetheless we'll be paying attention to it, of course. But one thing I do think is going to come into play here is the lake effect machine. Lake effect snow is definitely going to become more and more of a factor as the surface temperatures of the lakes are going to be a key factor in getting that generated here. Usually you want the air temperature to be a little bit cooler than the lake surfaces here, and I definitely think we're going to get a shot at that occurring before all is said and done. So depending on which lake you're at, Lake Michigan, maybe Lake Erie and Lake Toronto, I do think that those points will be the greatest area of concern when it comes to potentially heavy snowfall here. I don't think it's going to be a long duration event though. But another big topic, of course, and we've mentioned it a bunch on the channel lately, is the big temperature drop that's coming here. So over the course of the next day or so, enjoy these above average temperatures while you can if you're over towards the deep south right now. Tomorrow morning is when we're going to be at our warmest, where we're going to be about maybe as much as 20 degrees above average. But get ready, because here this comes, and while it's not going to be a super dramatic deal where we're 30 or maybe 40 degrees below average, there's still plenty of areas where we're getting 10, 15, 20 degrees below, which is still quite a swing from what we were just dealing with. At one point earlier like last week, we were in the 80s, so getting into the 50s and some places even the 40s. Just make sure you have those sweaters out. That's really the best thing that you can do at this time. And then once we get towards the end of the weekend here, you can expect us to start to warm back up as well. Now, if you're over towards the northwest right now, we're kind of marginal when it comes to the temperature outlook. We're right at about average, maybe just a little bit above or below. But towards the end here, especially if you're to the east, I would say, of maybe central Montana, I suppose, get ready for a massive little, I guess you would call it a cold spike here, because that's basically what this is. It's a narrow corridor. Wherever you end up being, if you happen to end up being in where this spike would occur here, man, that's gonna be pretty brutal here. Right now, that's still in Canada, but I do anticipate that to move into the northern plains here, where we could see maybe 20 to 30 degrees below average, which would be a massive drop off here. So definitely need to make sure you have the maybe the bigger coats ready for some of you guys. It's not unfamiliar territory for guys in this region, but nonetheless here, a little something to prepare for nonetheless. Make sure you have the firewood ready. I surely would if I was up there. I think it'd be fun though. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at just what's ahead beyond this point here. Really not going to look too far into the first 5 days here. We already just went over that here. But GFS and the Euro will both be on the screen here. And really what we're going to be looking for beyond that point, I would say, is after that 5 day period, just what to expect next. And the main thing that I've kind of picked up on from looking at this here is it does look like the pattern becomes a little bit more zonal here. So we're not seeing as much in the way of cold air, not much in the way of troughing. There is some bridging that comes into play, which is why in turn I'm anticipating not a notable warm up where we're well above average here, but I do think that we're gonna recover pretty quickly from the cool down towards the eastern half of the US. Doesn't look like the next big system comes in until about a week from now, I would say. And even then, it doesn't look like anything major is ongoing. I do see opportunities where we could get showers and storms over towards the deep south once we get to the 200-hour mark here. And once we go beyond that, I do think there's going to be a couple of surface lows that come into play that may bring additional chances for showers and storms towards the deep south. Hence why I'm thinking that we're going to see maybe closer to above average rainfall to close out the month within the 10-day mark. But really, I wouldn't expect anything magnanimous in the way of severe weather unless you're maybe over towards the Gulf Coast states. Depending on the mid-level and lower-level dynamics, we could squeeze out a severe storm or two, but it's nothing that I would be too concerned about at the moment. This is when things start to get a little bit more interesting once again, is when we get towards the 288-hour mark. Does look like we end up seeing a low pressure feature coming into play. It's kind of showing up a little bit on both models right now. Still honestly trying to get used to the fact that we have that range in the Euro now, which is awesome. But the fact that we're seeing something mildly similar, although there's a slight difference in time frames, that is something I'm going to be paying extra close attention to. The next notable feature after that point definitely looks like it's going to be towards the end of the model run, but you know what I always say with these model runs, towards the very end things kind of get a little bit wonky, and what you see now could easily change within the next 6 hours. So that being said, a lot to keep track of here, a lot to keep an eye out for in regards to trends, but definitely looks like the beginning of December could get pretty interesting here nonetheless. Now as we go further along here, we're also going to take a look at chances of us having the instability needed for severe storms to develop. We'll also have the lightning flash density over here towards the bottom left corner. And what you'll notice here is, of course, in the short term, as we mentioned before, not really expecting much in the way of instability. It's really going to be towards the, I would say, 7 to 10 day mark where we have the more notable instability signals, but I can't really put a lot of merit into this, as I've said before. Mainly due to the fact that we're so far out, and looking at thermodynamics at this point, it's kind of reckless. But I'm just looking for any sort of matching signal to start keeping an eye out for a trend at this point. This is really not me making a forecast at all. Just saying, if anything, I guess we'll call it an anti-forecast. But yeah, really just trending is what we're looking for at this point here. And from what I've seen from the Euro and the GFS here on this matter, there is a little something that we'll need to keep an eye on over here again towards the Gulf Coast. Just how significant it will be, too early to tell. I don't expect it to be anything major though, which would be a blessing to say the least. Now again, as I mentioned before, temperatures are a big topic, especially as we get into the medium and the long range. Expect, especially as we get into the medium range more and into the long range, that we're going to start to see another setup of a negative PNA, with a chance of the cold air eventually moving out towards the east here before all is said and done. Now, most notable thing that I'm picking up on is we're starting to see a little bit of a temperature contrast here that pops up. So potential frontal boundary might be coming into play by the end of next week, right in time for Thanksgiving. Could be some chances for severe storms as a result of that, but like I said, a little too early to tell at this point in time. But we're going to be keeping an extra close eye on model trends to see if any of this ends up verifying. Now, as we start out the month of December, cold mornings look like they are ahead for the deep south here. Of course, obviously, the range we're looking at now, more or less hearsay, but if this does indeed come into play, if we get any moisture with some of this, could be more snow towards the northeast, depending on how the moisture plays out towards the deep south, where in typical cases, the moisture often ends up outrunning the cold, and we may just end up with some raw rain out ahead of the really rich cold air, so to speak. But if, in the chance that it doesn't, we may even see some snow towards the Appalachians to start out December. But at this point, too early to tell. Now, last thing we're going to go ahead and take a look at, the last things that we're going to go ahead and take a look at here is, of course, the precipitation map. As we already know, rampant winter weather over towards the northwest in particular right now. Rain going to be diminishing by late tonight, probably tomorrow morning towards the deep south. And then this is where the lake effect machine may come into play here. It doesn't look quite as prominent as it once did a few days ago, but nonetheless, I still think that there are going to be some chances for some lake effect snow early on, but I do think that eventually it transitions over to rain, I should say. And then after that point, weather pattern itself, unless you're over towards the northwest, it kind of gets a little bit quiet. Maybe another feature tries to come into play here as we get towards the start of next week, but it's a pretty quick mover, I would say, almost like a clipper system. And then from that point, like I said, maybe some random chances of showers, maybe a couple rumbles of thunder over towards the deep south, which will definitely help with the drought situation. We had a pretty long stretch of cold air coming into play towards, not cold air, but dry conditions over here towards this region over the course of October and early part of November. So good news there. From that point, though, the map itself, this isn't really looking all that active right now, which really I'm sure a lot of us don't have any complaints with. But of course, as we know, things will change quickly, so we'll be keeping an eye on that. But lastly, over the course of the next 5 days, what we're mainly going to be looking at as far as the winter weather side of things, expect an increase in snowfall over here towards North Dakota. South Dakota comes into play as well. A brief little burst of snow over towards Lake Michigan. That might be the closest thing that we get to a lake effect event here. I just don't think conditions are coming together quite the same as they once did before here. We do have a bullseye over here, of course, over towards West Virginia over here and over towards the interior northeast. But as we get towards the coast, say areas like New York City, etc., looks like you guys are going to be stiffed on this particular snow event, but it looks like this is just the very beginning of the season here. So eyes front, and I hope you guys are looking forward to the holidays. Looks like for a lot of us here, it's gonna remain pretty dry, pretty stable. Again, if you're over towards the Gulf Coast, I'm keeping an eye on you guys, but no need to panic right now. That being said, hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video.